Hello, and welcome back to My Pop 5, the show in which we bring on artists to break down 5 pieces of pop culture that had an influence on them or helped shape them to become the creators and innovators that they are today. Today is a very special episode for me. For those of you that know, you all know that I'm a huge fan of the band Death Cab for Cutie. And today, we have the outstanding privilege of interviewing Zac Rae. Zac is a keyboardist, multi-instrumentalist for the band, and we were so lucky to be able to spend our time with him learning all about his Pop 5. Zac is not only a member of Death Cab, but also works extensively as a session musician. Zac has recorded with the likes of Alessia Cara, Lana Del Rey, Sara Bareilles, John Legend, and so many more. Near the end of today's episode, you're going to hear us mention that we're giving away a few copies of something off of Zac's Pop 5. So, if you're interested, please DM us or send us an email using the email in the show notes. We are endlessly grateful for Zac's time, and I hope you enjoy our talk as much as we did. Here it is, our conversation with Zac Rae. Hello, everyone. We are here with the incredible musician, Zac Rae. He's a phenomenal session musician, keyboardist, multi-instrumentalist, currently in the band Death Cab for Cutie, one of my favorite bands of all time. Zac, thank you so much for being here. I am just so honored.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I've been such a fan of yours over the years. One of my favorite things to do, and I've mentioned it here on the show before, is anytime I really love records, I always want to go back almost like you would on an old album and read the liner notes and see who all was involved with the project, and seeing your name pop up so many times made me such a fan. And then when you joined Death Cab, it was just like, oh my gosh, worlds colliding, and something I was just super excited about. As we get started, I like to ask everyone here on the show, can you list what your Pop 5 was with no comment or no context?
What did I say? I said the Traveling Wilbury's Volume 1 album, John Woo's The Killer, David Hockney's painting Pearblossom Highway, a novel by Joe Menno called The Boy Detective Fails, as an overall artist, the pianist Thelonious Monk.
Yes, and we are so excited to kind of get into that. But before we do, I just wanted to ask, where are you from? Where did you get your start? And what kind of got you interested in music and playing in the first place?
I'm from England originally. I was born there, and I moved to Los Angeles with my family when I was just around my 13th birthday. And I started playing piano when I was pretty young, like 5 or 6. And I think the thing that inspired me, as best as I can recall, was seeing somebody play a Scott Joplin ragtime piece at my school, one of the teachers maybe, or somebody that came in to visit the school. And we had the record at home. And I remember connecting, seeing somebody do it and listening to the record and asking my parents to get a piano for that reason. And then we got one, and I started taking lessons. And that was the first step. And there were many subsequent steps, but that was the first step that led me here.
Yeah. And was anyone else in your family musical, or was this something that kind of came out of the blue?
No, nobody plays an instrument in my family. There weren't even any instruments in the house before we got that piano. There was a lot of records. My dad has a giant shelf of records, mostly classical music, but some pop music and jazz. So I think that was the first exposure, but it's somewhat unusual in that regard. Almost all of my friends who are musicians, it was like something that came from their parents or an older sibling, or somebody had a guitar or a piano already. And it was...
Yeah, so I'm in a similar boat. I'm also a musician. People on the show know I'm a drummer also here in the LA area, and similar story. No one in my family was musicians, but I can echo the sentiment that all of my peers are always like, my grandpa played saxophone for 27 years, and then passed it down to me. So it's awesome to kind of hear that just as an observer, it was something that drove you to say, I want to do that, and that you stuck with it. Some people, especially as kids, start playing and taking lessons and hating it. So I'm assuming you had a great teacher or something that kept you inspired.
Yeah, I think I was really determined to learn those ragtime pieces. You have to be fairly good. You have to be fairly good to play those.
Yeah.
The stride, the left, the sort of hand independence. So by the time I left England, I could definitely do that. And then I think when I moved to America, I was in high school and I started playing in bands and studying jazz, just kind of stuck. Everything else kind of faded away, and that became the focus.
Do you remember which rag it was, the first one you heard, by any chance?
Well, it was probably The Entertainer because of the, you know, it was like sort of the most popular one. But it was either that or the Maple Leaf Rag, and I was very determined to learn both when I was a kid, and I did. I can still play the first 8 bars or so of the Maple Leaf Rag from memory. I can't play anything else, the rest of it. But I had the whole thing like blazing it, you know, when I was like about 11 or 12 or something, and I was like, so it was probably the Maple Leaf Rag because that felt like that was the thing I was determined to get to that one.
Yeah,
and I got it like sometime around 11 or 12. I kind of nailed it, and felt very accomplished.
Yeah, that's amazing. I ask only because when I was in music school, I went to be a jazz drummer for the most part, you know, but I still had to go through a lot of classical training and stuff. And so an entire semester was dedicated for me to like xylophone rags. So I played a lot of George Hamilton Green stuff and just had to play these rags. But what I think is beautiful is, you know, a lot of people will hear that. And I think just because we're so far away from when it was initially created, but there's not a lot of appreciation for that era of music and, you know, today's day and age. But that type of swing, it's like sits between swing and straight when you're playing some of these tunes. And I think like that gets lost as a listener sometimes, some of the complexity that comes from just getting that feel right. So I think it's cool, you know, it was something at such a young age you were drawn to.
Yeah, I think I just loved the sound of it. But it's probably the contemporary pop music right now probably doesn't have a lot of relevance to that. But I mean, you hear that that's in the Beatles. It's like When I'm 64 is ragtime, and then certainly a lot of the stuff that I really liked when I was a teenager, like the Elliott Smith albums, or the stuff that like John Bryan was producing in the 90s. Early 2000s, is like there's tons of that influence on it, stride piano and those kinds of waltzy feels and subtle swing. So it's not that far removed from the world we live in. Maybe not so much the Travis Scotts of the world, but you know, certainly what was pop music when I was a kid still had some kind of through line to it.
Shoot, that's all it's going to take, though, is someone posts something on TikTok and then it ends up getting sampled, and it could be a Travis Scott tune, you know, but who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
Hey, Zach, I'm wondering, you know, growing up in England, at least until your early teenage years, were you, you know, moving to America, was there a big cultural difference in the kind of music that you were introduced to, or that even, you know, your peers were listening to?
Yeah, to some degree. I think I wasn't that interested in the music that was popular when I was a teenager. So I think that the reason I picked that record, the first record, the Traveling Wilburys record, was because it's the first record that I can remember like having like my own copy of. Which was probably just my dad's copy that I just took permanently away from him so I could listen to it myself, and forced him to buy another copy of it.
Yeah.
You know, and that was like 89 or 90 that record came out, I think, 88 maybe. And that wasn't really like, I mean, it was a popular record, but it was also not what like 9-year-old kids were listening to. Like they were listening to like Michael Jackson or like Guns N' Roses maybe, or like stuff like that, you know, like that's what I feel like the kids at my school were listening to. And I was like, no, like who's this Roy Orbison guy? Like he's got the most amazing voice. Like, why isn't like everybody sing like that guy? And like, well, because there's only ever been one Roy Orbison. But like that was the thing, like I heard that when I was a kid, and I was like, all the harmonies and like the sort of the jangly guitars, and I was like, that's beautiful sounding to me, like when I was like 10. Even when I was in England, I don't think I was like really listening to like what the kids at my school were listening to. And then when I moved to America, it was kind of like everybody at my school either listened, there was like one set of kids listened to like rap, and one set of kids listened to like what you would have called alternative, like the Lollapalooza festival of the early 90s, like the Chili Peppers and Nirvana and Pearl Jam and stuff like that. And then there were like 3 kids that just like wanted to listen to like Captain Beefheart. and I hung out with those kids.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's talk about this record, I think, in detail. For the audience, this is a group that George Harrison put together of other great songwriters and artists, and Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, Roy Orbison, as was mentioned. And so my question, I think, is, you mentioned this was your first record that you claimed, this is kind of mine and this is the one I wanted, and you gravitated towards. Were you familiar of all of them and their solo careers, or this was just all new? Like, this supergroup is something that I love and was gravitated towards? We'll get back to the show in just a moment. No, this isn't an ad read, but we do have a couple things that we'd love to share. I've been getting quite a few questions about how you can support the show. The truth is, you're already doing it by listening. But if you're looking to do a little bit more, the best way is to support our show is to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Rating and reviewing truly does make all the difference for podcasts. So leave us a review, and in that review, tell us what your Pop 5 is, and we'll read it on the show. Another way to help us out is just following us on Instagram at MyPop5. Anyway, thank you again for listening, and we'll get back to the show.
No, like, as far as I can remember, at my house, we didn't have any Beatles records or any. We had Bob Dylan albums. My dad still has some Bob Dylan albums on LP.
Yeah.
And on CD. I think that he was a little older in the 60s, so I think he kind of thought that, like, maybe the Beatles was kind of like teeny bopper music. But like, Dylan was kind of serious. Like, he's a poet. Like, he's a beatnik. So like, he was like, I think my dad sort of liked like folk music and like blues and jazz, but I don't think he really was that into like rock and roll. So there wasn't a lot of that in the house. I didn't hear a Beatles album until like way later.
Wow.
Than hearing Traveling Wilbury's Volume 1, which seems really weird, right?
It's a cool way to experience it, though.
Yeah, but I mean, you're a kid, and so it's like people forget that Ronald Reagan was a movie star. It's like, because he was president. It's
Totally.
like, if you were born in the 80s, Ronald Reagan was just a shitty president. But he was also a kind of average actor as well before that.
Totally. Yeah. And what was it about the record that you think you enjoyed? Were there certain songs that you heard and you loved, or was it just kind of the combination of everything on the record?
I think I liked all of it. The songwriting and the harmonies, and it's like quite a sophisticated record, compared to, like I said, like what like kids you might have been listening to as like a kid. I think that I heard the harmonies and it was the first time that like I remember like wanting to learn how to play a song by ear from the record. And I remember like had started playing guitar about that time, but not very seriously. Just like I had a cheap guitar, and there was a guy that lived across the street that gave me a couple lessons. And I remember having him try and teach me like how to play. Like, I think it's the last song on the record. It has this kind of specific guitar riff where it's like sliding the shape up and down.
Yeah.
And like he showed me how to do, like, he's like, oh, it's just you put your fingers and you like move them up and down and it's the same shape. And before that, like I played classical music off of music, and I played the ragtime off of music, and I would sit and I would make up my own songs on the piano and just kind of noodle around. But that was sort of the first time that I paid attention to anything pop music in a way that like I thought was like important to me.
Yeah. All of the tunes I think are really agreeable too. At that time, I think it was, the barrier for entry is, I think there's songs on there for everybody, And
oh yeah. There's a few kind of slightly goofy songs, but
yeah.
But most of them are really brilliant. The one that is my favorite now is it's the one that Roy Orbison sings called "You're Not Alone Anymore." It's like track 5 or 6 on the record.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think this is just like one of his best ever songs and vocals. Like, it's up there with like all of his classic 50s and 60s records for me. Like, it's such a good song. I still put that record on like a road trip.
Yeah.
If I'm, it's like good driving music. No, nobody's bummed out to hear it. My girlfriend might be sick of it by now, but
sure.
But I don't think so. I think she still likes it.
Yeah.
I think she can still stand that one.
You mentioned that tune and your love, I think, for Roy Orbison a couple of times, right? My understanding is he passed very shortly after the release of this record, So
yeah.
I'm sure that was also, in your own investigation, oh, I love either this tune or Roy Orbison. I've heard of him and now I can kind of dig in, and then he passes. Like, that kind of realization, I'm sure, was probably tough at that time as well.
I don't even think I realized that at the time. I don't even think I made that connection until I think when they put out a second record without him, I was like, oh, why are there no Roy Orbison songs on this record?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, he's dead.
Yeah, you thought it's not no band member drama. It's just that he passed,
Yeah.
My favorite tune, you mentioned harmonies a couple of times, and there's a tune on there, Heading for the Light.
Yeah.
And there's a couple moments in that. One of my favorite things about this record is that tune in couple places has like these really like almost Beach Boy-esque harmonies in the background throughout, over this like beautiful melody. But then like in the pre-chorus, they like break it up to where it's just like two voice harmony, right? That the way those two voices complement each other, it's just like, it's one of my favorite tunes ever, that one. The genius that I think comes with that, and all of them being brilliant songwriters, but the way they were kind of able to be egoless and play the specific roles that they needed to for each song was just like so incredible.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. There's a little like a documentary about the making of it. It's bits of it on YouTube. I think it was like the press release, like sort of the press documentary for it. And you see him, they're just all singing around one microphone, like I think in Tom Petty's house, or they might be in Dave Stewart's house.
Yeah.
They're in somebody's house. They're like in the kitchen and they just have a microphone hanging there in the middle of the room, like the Beach Boys would have. And they're all just, they step up and do their part and they sort of step back. It's fantastic. And it's unfortunately becoming a bit of a lost art, but people carry on with that tradition. There's people out there that are making fantastic music and singing great and doing harmonies and all of that. So I can't, I don't want to sound like too much of a grumpy old man. Like,
sure,
kids these days don't understand.
Yeah,
it's old. Everything changes. It's cool. It's interesting to see the new things that come out in the world. And but that was just that one particular kind of, that was sort of the bridge from the older world of sort of music from the 50s, 60s, 70s. The thing that kind of connected me to it first, which was most of what I listened to when I was growing up, like when I was a teenager and starting bands and doing stuff. Everything we wanted to do was like sound like something from that era. It was never like, let's be a grunge band, or like, let's play rap metal, or it was like never interesting to me. It was always like, how do we make something that sounds like the Beatles, or like, how do we make something that sounds like I said, like Captain Beefheart, or like, like the weirder stuff, like somehow sets the stage for sort of being in the band I'm in now. And a lot of the work that I've done, although it's taken me, there's been so many diversions along the way. So many different things. That's why I picked that. It was sort of, I could directly place in my mind as being something that brought me here now.
When you're listening to music, both then and maybe it's evolved since then, do you think you gravitated more towards what you were hearing melodically and instrumentally, or were you all drawn to lyricism and the poetry of it at the same time, or was there any sort of separation?
I think that within pop music, I was always pretty interested in the lyric. Very little of the music that like I really loved and put on repeat over and over again had nonsense lyrics, or kind of, it was a lot of stuff. It's like Dylan, Elvis Costello, Tom Waits, Elliott Smith, Leonard Cohen, stuff where you could really, even if what they're saying is abstract, you can hear what they're saying. It's important.
Yeah.
So I think that was something that was important early on, and is still if I'm listening to pop music. Having said that, now that I'm older, I'm less precious about a lot of stuff. And I was at a birthday party for a friend of mine a few days ago. And we set up a sort of a fake karaoke setup for him in his backyard, so everybody could sing karaoke like outside. We were putting on all these songs, and you see the lyrics written out on the screen, and people are reading them literally, and you realize how much nonsense there is in almost all pop music is nonsense. And actually it's just kind of about how it sounds and how it flows and how it makes you feel. And somebody did Under Pressure like as a duet, and you're just like, those words don't make any sense. Like nothing, it's just beady baba, people on streets, beady it up, people on streets. It's like, it's not poetry, it's just, but it makes you feel great, you know. So that's probably could have helped to understand that a bit better when I was younger and be less snobby about stuff. But here we are.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I asked because, as a drummer, I mentioned a lot of the times when people are suggesting things that I might be interested in, they're thinking, oh, it has to have crazy drums, it has to be Travis Barker or some metal drummer because they play a ton of notes, but I've always been one to gravitate towards, more singer-songwriter focused music because I love, melody and lyricism. And I think it goes to like these artists here, all of them are such prolific songwriters, and even into, I mean, this is my opinion, but the band you're in now, I think Ben is such a prolific songwriter for Death Cab too, and that's like, I've always loved that. So that's kind of where my question stemmed from, is like, that's what I've gravitated more so than I think what's happening as a band. Like, I think the song specifically in this type of music, like, I think it's driven by what's happening in the vocals and the melody and the lyricism that gets me involved. But you're right. A lot of these pop hits are just based off of, does the melody hit? It almost doesn't matter what syllables you're saying after that. It's all just part of it.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you that Ben is a fantastic songwriter and lyricist, and he's very prolific. I'm staring at a folder of 100 demos, that would attest to that fact that he's remarkably so. And I don't know that I would be in that band if I didn't feel that much sort of like love and respect for Ben's songwriting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know that I would have committed to doing it, like long term and be sort of so tethered to it. Over the years, I've worked with a lot of people, and I've worked with a lot of super, super talented people. I hope nobody hears this and thinks that I'm not like a fan of their artistry or something.
Sure.
Basically just sort of saying like, it would be hard to be in a band with somebody that I didn't think was a great songwriter.
Right.
Whenever I've committed myself to something on that level beyond like being hired to be there or being a session musician or a side musician, it's always because I've found something, in their songwriting, and that has sort of been a guiding light throughout my career in terms of what I've done and what I've been able to do and what I've chosen to do.
Yeah. And I may be, reaching a bit just because I am a fan. And, after we've been talking about the Traveling Wilburys, I talked about like the lack of ego in terms of how things are being presented. And when I think about like Death Cab and the members of that band, even today, I think Dave is an incredible songwriter with his work that he's done. And,
he's fabulous.
Jason does incredible work on drums, and everyone like fits the role that I think like Death Cab, as even today, even with the Chris Walla departure, etc., is still embodies this what feels egoless, and the way you guys are all positioned on stage, it's almost like equal in terms of where you guys are placed. And so I saw a lot of parallels. I maybe, like I said, it's maybe a stretch comparing to George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, some of the greats, but that's been my, the way I perceive the band is egoless and just for the love of art, and that's been one of my favorite things about watching you guys play.
Well, that's very kind of you. So what you're saying is that we are person for person as talented as the 5 members of the Traveling Wilburys.
That's what I'm saying. I'll put it on record.
I'm going to quote you as that. Person for person, you could substitute, and we are as equally talented as the 5 members of the Traveling Wilburys.
Yeah. No, I think it's such a great record bringing back to them. I think, for the audience, if you haven't listened to this record, some of my favorite tunes on here are Last Night, which is fun, Tom Petty led tune. The Orbison tune that Zach mentioned, Not Alone Anymore, is also phenomenal. And my favorite, again, is Heading for the Light. Those are some of my favorites. Zach, do you have any other tracks that you'd kind of want to say that are favorites for you?
I mean, I think there's only 10 songs on the record, but the first song, Handle with Care, the last song, I think it's called End of the Line.
End of the Line, yep. Mm-hmm.
Which is the one that I remember learning on guitar when I was a kid. And then the other one that I really loved is when I was a kid, which I don't know if it holds up, is Tweeter and the Monkey Man.
Yeah.
which is a Dylan song where he seems to be kind of, I don't think they had the word yet, but he seems to be kind of trolling Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
It's a very strange song in retrospect, where he's sort of done this like cut up of Bruce Springsteen characters and told this weird story that doesn't make any sense, like sort of noir, like heist story using characters from Bruce Springsteen songs.
Yeah.
It's a very strange song, but it has some, has a cool slide dobro guitar line. So pretty good.
Yeah. My understanding too is that like they were all in the room working on this and were playing like a game and betting with each other of like finishing the line with the funniest thing, right? So almost like Mad Libs, where they'd sing like a portion of the line and then just blurt something out, and whichever one made it on the record.
That's what I think is the end of the song. It's the third song.
Rattled?
like she loves you rattle. Yeah, it's like she loves your bottle of water, and then they would each say something, and they kept just making it's like pots and service, and like one of them said Drooling Wilbury, and that's how they ended up with the band name.
Yeah.
It was like they just were just making stuff up or like reading stuff out of magazines. So I mean, it's amazing to think about those legends, of which 3 are gone.
I know.
Now, those 5 legends just like standing around a room, just like making up, it's just, that doesn't really get any better than that. Like the sort of combined talents of all those people. It's really something.
We'll get to your other things here on the list. I'll share one last thing, but I think kind of captures the sentiment of what we were just talking about. When I was going up through music school, I had a person who kind of talked about that. As a musician, you can practice your ass off, and that's of course going to be important, but in most cases people want to make music with people that are good people that they like to hang out with and are a good hang, and when you can do that, I think you're just hanging out with your buddies and you're creating something that you love doing. And so what you just shared in that story about them, like, it was easy in the sense that they're just 5 buddies hanging out, doing what they love. And it doesn't have to be anything more than that. And the music kind of captures that. And I've always taken that with me in terms of how I want to carry myself. I need to be a good human among a good musician.
That is very good advice. Very good. It's a very good thing to have in one's mind. My bandmate Dave, somebody asked us sort of in a group setting, like, what advice would you give to musicians starting out? And Dave's advice was, think about the kind of person that you'd want to sit in a van with for 12 hours a day and then be that person. Yeah. And so I no credit for that. That's all Dave. But I think that's that is a very good way of thinking about entering a career in music. And that's definitely not something that they teach you in music school.
At all.
It's definitely something that a lot of the people that I was at music school with, both in the faculty and the student body, could have hopefully have learned by now.
Yes.
But perhaps had not learned when I was there.
Yeah.
Myself included. I was definitely a jerk when I was younger.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's rampant in the industry, sadly, in a lot of ways where
I think it's rampant in humanity, and it's definitely rampant in youth.
Yeah.
That's really not me trying to be a grumpy old man. That's me trying to reflect on the fact that, like, myself when I was younger and all the guys like I'm in the band with now, it's like, it's so funny because they'll have stories about things that happened 10, 15 years ago when Chris was in the band, and they were all young and less mature in all of their behaviors and attitudes. And some of the things that I hear them, it's like, oh my God, I can't imagine you like throwing a guitar across a room at somebody or like,
yeah.
Like things like that. And it's like, and then you're like, well, yeah, because you were 25. And like when I was 25, I did stupid shit and made bad choices as well. And everybody does. And, nobody comes out like perfect.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think I'm glad I've learned that and able to kind of carry myself in that way. But let's go ahead and move on to some of your other things here. One of the ones I was most excited about to talk to you here was the movie The Killer, the John Woo film. Can you tell me a bit about why that's here on your list and what about it was so impactful for you?
Yeah, I wanted to not just do like 5 records because it seemed like that was not the theme of this.
Sure.
Like 5 bands or something, which I like to think about. A lot of other stuff influences me besides just listening to other music.
Yeah.
And influences me to make music and make decisions. So I was trying to think about a film, and there were a couple, and I kind of kept coming back to that one. It's like, that movie is so strange and wonderful. And it was also something that I saw when I was a kid or about the time it came out. So I was probably about 10 when I saw it the first time, or 11. And I think it was first time that I was sort of conscious that something could be artistic and also entertaining at the same time. Like something could be like artsy and highbrow and have these kind of serious themes, but yet also just be fun. And it's an action movie. I mean, there's car chases, there's gunfights, there's really cheesy music, like incredibly cheesy music, and melodrama that's like a soap opera almost. So it's over the top, slow motion doves flying, and and that was something that I kind of got from that movie. And I think that you see it's something that like other people got from that movie or similar things around that time. Like I think that it's like without that movie, you wouldn't have Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah.
it's art, but it's also really funny and really snappy and entertaining at the same time. And the way that it uses, in the case of The Killer, it uses this the music is like soap opera music to score an action movie. I mean, it's a very strange choice, but it's the sort of thing that I think you get that leads to these other things. And this kind of postmodern thing of irony in the use of music against film, or the use of humor against violence, or the use of, so all of these things like that. That was just something that impacted me a lot when I was in that early teenage phase. The sort of the second reason, there's something about the criminal archetype in storytelling that is similar to what it's like to be a musician.
Oh, okay.
This is a bit of a stretch, but
sure.
And not so much not like Scarface, not like the mafia thing of I'm gonna rule this empire.
Yeah,
it's more like hitmen or like bank robbers. Though it's like they're on their own and they have to sort of be very, very good at their job, but their life is also kind of lonely. They don't really have, it's hard to connect to the real world because nobody understands what they do.
Yeah.
And they're always kind of looking for a connection in these films. It's always the hitman is looking for love, or it's the bank robber is looking for love, and then he meets somebody, he falls in love, and he's going to do one last heist before he quits the business forever and become like a real person. There's a lot of ways of looking at the life of a musician as a bit like that. It's people on the outside don't really understand what it's like they think they know, but they don't. And there's a lot of ways that it's really hard to maintain relationships, romantic and friendships and family relationships with people that are outside of the life, because you're gone all the time. And even if you're not touring, you're in the studio all hours and you're just sort of focused in this relentless way. And so I think that consistently stories like that, like I said, sort of bank robbers or hitmen, or these kind of lone wolf kind of criminals, that is often something that I think appeals to people in my industry. I think you recognize yourself in it, the life, the sort of dedication to the life.
Yeah.
So I think that that's something that I didn't even realize I was tuning in on when I was first watching that movie, but then seeing it again as an adult, it resonates. All right, just one more tour and then I'll be home, and then we can settle down and have a normal life. No, you never do. You don't. You can't really. You're in it. You're committed to doing this kind of forever, and you have to find ways of balancing it and making it work. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. As you were talking, I was thinking back to the movie, and a lot of the themes about this movie surround friendship and honor and respect towards your craft. I think there's a duality of that without the film, right? Because you see it from the assassin side of this, but you also see it from the policeman detective side of this as well, right?
Right.
And there needs to be a respect and love for the craft, and the only people who know are your brothers who are also doing the kind of same thing. And so yeah, I can definitely see that from the musician side of things. Of only other musicians can kind of resonate with what that world is like and that love, because your first love is your craft in so many ways.
Absolutely. And it's like that, when you see people you're out touring and you're playing a festival and you see your friends that are in another band, and it's hey man, how's it going? And they're it's going, we're out here doing it. How's it going with you? And you're it's going, we're doing it too. There's a lot of amazing moments, experiences that you couldn't ever substitute for. And then there's a lot of times when you're just there doing the work as well. You're there we got to get to the gig, we got to play the gig, we got to get to the next town, rain or shine. It's, lives are maybe not depending on it, but it's still it still has to be done.
Yeah. Some favorite scenes in the movie for me, for the audience, there's the love interest of the assassin in this movie is blind throughout the movie. And there's a scene where the detective and basically ambushes the assassin in the home of the blind woman. And they're both having a standoff, gun at each other's faces. And she
can't see because she's blind. Yeah. It's like Mickey Mouse and Dumbo, right? Or something, right? They call each other Mickey Mouse and Dumbo.
They go Runt and Shrimp Head, I think is what they call each other.
Oh, that's weird, because I feel originally, maybe that's something they had to change for legal reasons. Because I feel in the original version, it's like Mickey Mouse and Dumbo or something like that. They're like Disney names.
Interesting. Wow.
I'm gonna have to look that up. I don't know if I'm just misremembering that or if, but that sounds like something that like Disney would have like made them change because it's just in the subtitling. It's like you don't hear them say like Mickey Mouse. They're speaking Cantonese, I think.
Yeah.
But it's in the subtitles, so I'm gonna research that one.
Yeah, do it. Yeah, but anyway, like it's so funny because she's blind. She can't see them pointing guns at each other. And she's asking what's going on, and they're just asking like long best friends, you know. And so like that scene, I think is just funny. But then I mentioned duality a bit ago, and you know, kind of that isolation that you can feel. And there's two perspectives: the detective and the assassin. And there's one really awesome scene that's very artistic, you know, where the detective is in the assassin's home and he's like sitting in the chair, and it cuts through all of the actions of them kind of doing similar or almost the exact same things. And like, there's not much that are separating these two individuals other than their career path, and the things they do are almost exactly the same. And I think that it was like such a beautiful thing for a movie that also fires probably 20,000 bullets in every other scene.
It's and as I was saying, I think it's a film that like it's the first time I can remember seeing a movie where I was confused. I was like, what movie am I watching? It's funny, but it's also it's like there are people, car chases and crazy gunfights. I mean, some of the best ever filmed, certainly up until that point, like really spectacular like choreography and photography on all the action scenes. But then, these sort of melodrama and this sort of psychological twinning between them, and then very, very funny movie too.
Yeah,
very, very funny. Even sad stuff is kind of funny. Like the end is pretty. Pretty funny.
Yes,
yeah, definitely, highly recommended. I actually haven't seen that in a number of years. Bringing it up made me really want to watch it again, so I'm going to put it on as soon as I can have a night off to check it out.
Daniel and I had a hard time finding it, but he found a random link on YouTube. So look on YouTube because it's not on many streaming services or to rent, but we found it. So
interesting. I think I have a DVD of it somewhere.
Oh, nice.
Still, my dad is an avid movie buff, and he has a lot of DVDs, and I'm pretty sure I got one from him at some point, but if I didn't, I'm pretty sure I could.
Yeah.
He has just about everything on DVD. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, good intel. I will scope it out, and we'll get back to each other on this Mickey Mouse.
Please,
conundrum.
It's only on the DVD version. Yeah. We'll find out or something, which would be funny. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on, Zach. I don't want to keep you too long here. Pearblossom Highway, the collage painting from David Hockney. Tell me why you love this so much and why it's on your top 5.
I don't know much about art. There's not a lot of, I didn't study it. I'm embarrassed often to know so little about it. My girlfriend studied art history very seriously, and so she can identify like any painting ever, who painted it, when it was painted, why it's important. And but that's one, I remember seeing it at an exhibition, I think at the Getty Center in about 97 or 98. So I was 18, being sort of like really floored by it, and then sort of learning about process of it and the implications of it. And it's something that's always stuck with me. Process in that is something that I think about a lot, like making records and working in the studio, and the process of capturing music recorded versus just performing music, like just playing. They're similar, but they're different. And in the sense that piece of art is a painting, but it's also a photograph.
Yeah. And
it's a collage. It's neither one nor the other. Some of the details, like the sky is not the sky. The sky is one photo duplicated.
Yeah.
Right? It's like something you might do on a record where it's like, oh, we had this one bar of drums that sounded really good. So then we cut it and we repeated it. And now it's playing through the whole song. The way that the painting, the collage, I always think that he calls it a painting.
Yeah, he does.
Which is funny because it's not. It's a series. It's a collage of photographs, but he refers to it as a painting, which I think is kind of similar. It's like you talk about like it's like, oh, that Death Cab song, like Soul Meets Body.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, there's the song, which is the composition.
Yeah.
And then there's the record, which would usually when people say the song is what they mean. And the record is like an aggregate of different performances of the song. And in that case, that's the song that's built around a sample. The mandolin riff, the acoustic guitar mandolin riff that starts the song is a sample, and it's cut up and it's repeated. It's one bar that's cut up and looped throughout the song. So it's not performed. It's still not performed.
Right. It's
nobody on
track,
stage sits there and goes biddaloo 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 biddaloo. You know, nobody's playing that. It's like it's that same photograph of the sky, duplicated out. Yet it has this emotional quality to it that is part of the performance of it. And when we play that song and people sing along to it and it connects with an audience. So that painting is something that like sticks in my mind as a visual representation of what it really means to like create music, particularly in the studio, because you're trying to get something that's like, to quote another band, it's, you know, it's like even better than the real thing. You're trying to create like this thing that's artificially perfect or artificially exists beyond what could exist in reality. So if that means there's three of Ben's voice singing all at the same time, there's no three Ben. There's nobody else in the world that sounds like him. And certainly, you know, Dave does a great job singing background vocals in our band, but you're creating this artificial reality all the time. And that painting it sort of embodies that for me. And it's beautiful, which is also at the end of the day, all that really matters, right?
Yeah.
Like making something that's good and that makes you feel something. That was why I sort of chose that and as a means of thinking about other mediums and how they can impact choices I might make on a day-to-day basis. And that's something I sort of think about. Like, is it okay to do this? Is it okay to loop the drums? It's like, well, yeah. As David Hockney like looped the sky.
Yeah.
He took the piece of sky he liked and he looped it across the whole sky. So you're like, cool, I can do that too. Or like, I actually, during the pandemic, drove there.
Oh, wow.
To that
highway.
I sat in the spot. And of course, it doesn't look anything like the painting now. I think it's been changed. I think the signs have changed and foliage has changed. But of course, the painting is itself not real.
Yeah.
It's a composite. So even that day, it didn't look like that painting, which is also art, right? Like that is, in creating art, you change the thing that you're viewing. That's fundamental to recording music and performing music. It's like you think you're doing something and maybe what you're doing isn't actually being perceived the way that you think it is. And when you flip the mirror around and you sort of go and listen back to it, you know, that thing that you thought you were doing that sounded really cool isn't actually cool.
Yeah.
Or doesn't sound good when it's coming out of the speakers, or vice versa. Maybe something that you thought sounded stupid and you hear it on the speakers and it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's really interesting. So that's what I have to say about that one.
What's really great about that photo is it's kind of split in half, where one half is really heavily congested with signage and the text on the ground, and the other half is like more, you know, trees, and there's some garbage on the ground and things like that. And one thing I was reading is that, you know, some of the intention behind that was like, when you're on a highway, there's the perspective of the driver whose focus is on the signs and the things that he needs to be aware of. And the other person can just take in the scenery and the stuff that's on the side of the road. And as we kind of equate it back to music, you know, this collage or painting that's compiled of 700 plus separate photographs is a bunch of varying viewpoints formed together and to become a single interpretation of what we can see. And thinking back on music, you've had a role as a session musician where you are just a couple of those pieces, you know, that make up the entire body of work. And not only is it, you know, varying different viewpoints in that story that I just mentioned about the driver and the passenger, but, you know, in all of art, you know, we all can play these various different viewpoints and perspectives, and it can all be, you know, one big thing. And so when we look back at records, it is very important your, you know, touches that you make on all the records that you've worked on, because they help make the whole piece, you know. And without that, those couple pieces of Zac that were looped or that were layered in, it doesn't make the record what it is. And so I think that's really beautiful.
Well said.
Yeah. Well, we'll move on here to the next one here. Novel, The Boy Detective Fails. Tell me a bit about this book, how you were introduced to it, and kind of what you love about it.
In a very not 21st century manner, I bought this book with nobody told me about it, or I didn't read a review of it, didn't even like see a sign at the bookstore. I was in a bookstore in Minneapolis where I was visiting my grandfather when he was still alive. It was on a stand and I liked the title and I bought it.
Wow.
And it's funny now, like so little of our lives is random like that anymore, right? It's like you have your friends saying like, check this thing out. on social media, people are like, I read this book, I listened to this record, I saw this thing, I did this, I did that. And then you've got the algorithms like telling you like, you might like this.
Yeah.
And so the thought of like discovering anything at random is like kind of magical these days. Like when I do, it's like, it's incredible. It's like, you like feel like you've found buried treasure. Yeah. I just love that book, coming at it from a very different angle than the John Woo movie. But in terms of, like all the stuff that we've kind of talked about, like, when you're a kid and you're just like practicing the piano and you're like, I got this piece, I played this piece really good. And like, people are like, yeah, kid, like, good job. Like you played that piece really well. And then at some point, like you sort of wake up and you're like 30 and you're like, oh, what does it all mean, man? Like, what am I doing? And like, is this it? Like, is this my life? It's one of the things that book is about. It's certainly something that I think at that phase, the end of my 20s, when I bought it and read it first, spoke to me a lot. Right. Like, you're here, there is no more like point where like, yeah, when I grow up or like when I start to take it seriously, like when I like finally get a gig, then I'll like really, it's like, no, you got a gig. You are a musician. You're a grown up. Like you're an adult. Like this is it now. You just have to handle yourself and like navigate and like make choices and try and do good work and try and be a good person. And that was, I think, sort of something that spoke to me at that time. What is it, like the Saturn return, people say? Like I was
at 28
or so. And I was kind of like, okay, like I'm going to be 30 in a couple of years. Like what am I doing? Like I've already toured the world. I have a studio. I've played on these records. I've done this. I've done that. I've been on TV. And like, now what do I do? Like, I guess I just keep doing this. So I think that was what spoke to me about that book. I have since recommended it to a lot of people. And I think that most of the people I've recommended it to have really enjoyed it. I kept buying copies of it. I kept giving it away and buying more copies of it so that I would like always have a copy. And then whenever I talk to somebody about it, I would like give them my copy and then I'd just go buy another one.
Yeah.
So I've probably bought like 5 or 6 copies of it at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, just that was something that the first 2 things were sort of when I was maybe around like 10 to 12 years old. The painting was something that I thought about like as when I was like 20. That was something that I thought about like when I was like 30.
Yeah.
For a long time, I wanted to try and do something musical with that book. Like I would sort of try and convince people I knew who like made movies, like you should make a movie of this book and like I'll write the music for it.
Yeah.
And like the weirdest coda to that is a few months ago, I was on one of the first planes I'd been on since COVID started. And there's a movie on the plane and it's called
The Kid Detective.
The Kid Detective.
Yes.
And I was like, what? Is this a movie of The Boy Detective Fails? And it's not, but it's very similar. It's very similar.
Did you like it?
It was okay.
Yeah.
There were things I liked about it.
Yeah. And
the whole time I was kind of puzzled by it because I was on a plane. So we're so right. It's like, you're used to be able to like, what's the deal with this movie?
Yeah.
Is this based on The Boy Detective Fails? And I was like stuck on this plane. So I like couldn't answer my own quandaries about it in real time. So I was a bit distracted. I was sort of the whole time like watching it and I was like, does this happen in the book? And this is just, they changed the title or it's like different or is this a ripoff and like nobody knows it and like I'm going to bust it open? Like, surely I can't be the first person that's noticed this, but maybe because I hadn't even heard of the movie before I was on this plane. It like I just didn't know it existed. So I guess that, after that movie, I doubt anybody's now going to make a movie if The Boy Detective Fails. But maybe one day.
My understanding is they made like a theater production of it in some capacity.
Which when I looked up all of this, I saw that, which I didn't realize. But I think it was something because I think the author teaches at a university in Chicago, and I think maybe it was something associated with the program there. Or, I'm not sure, but it wasn't like a big touring Broadway production. It was like I think a local thing. A local thing that happened.
That makes sense. Yeah,
but I do really love that book. It's the one that I keep thinking, because it's very quick. You can read it in I keep thinking, it's like I'm about due to reread it, but there's also so many other books that I haven't read. I'm slow at starting and finishing that I don't know when I'm going to get to read it again. But I look forward to coming back to it at some point. And
Well, in the spirit of how you've operated with this book, we'll do the same for our listeners and give a few copies away to them, to the people who are interested. So
fantastic.
We'll be happy to do that at the end of the episode. We'll put all of that info for people who are interested, and we will get that sent to them. So let's go ahead and move on to your last. Oh, go ahead, Daniel. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to mention, I think it's always interesting to see how different guests will interpret the theme of the show, the Pop 5, and you kind of have it organized. And, it seems like these 10-year increments where there was some kind of, the universe kind of aligned for you. You found some piece of art that kind of sent you in a new direction or really meant a lot to you. And obviously, you can't always decide, or you can't necessarily go looking for things like that. But is it something that you feel sometimes you have to step away from the music and find inspiration elsewhere? Is that something you do intentionally on a regular basis?
I try to. It's harder and harder as one gets older to keep up with all the music that I need or should keep up with. This person made a new record. This person made a new record. This person made a new record. There's this old record that I'd never heard of that I just found out about. But yeah, I think that you don't write a book about books. It's like you write a book about something. In that sense, it's like music is unique in that it doesn't have to be about something. Like if you're writing a piece of instrumental music, it doesn't have to be about anything. It's just sound. But, it's usually about something, or it's like you're thinking about something, or you're someone, or a feeling, or something. And so yeah, I think it's always really important for anybody making music to get out of just music for a minute. I always can tell when I work on music for other people, you can tell that they're just trying to make music that sounds like other music.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I can tell that you really love U2. You must really, because you're just basically making music about U2.
Yeah.
That's what your songs are about. Is about how much you like U2. It's really obvious in your songs. That's not very inspiring to either listen to or participate in making. But when you work on music that's obviously man, you really lived a life. You were really feeling something, and you wrote something that's meant something to you.
Yeah.
Whether it's a guy quietly whispering and playing a nylon string guitar, or somebody playing heavy metal. It's you can tell when they mean it. So yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I don't have a discipline or a specific way that I do that. And it's sort of good to talk about it, because then you remember right, I should do that more, because most of the time I'm in my car listening to music, I got to listen to those mixes, or I got to check out that new Taylor Swift made another album, and I guess I'm supposed to listen to it because people are going to ask me my opinion about it. And it's nice. And it's one of the nice things about traveling is you have time. It's you go to museums, you go to galleries, you go and see movies, you go and you read books. It's you have much more time at home. It's you're either working, or you're cooking dinner, or you're cleaning the house, or you're walking the dog, or whatever your thing is the bricks that make up your life. And so,
well, let's hit up the last one here, who I think is also a king of authenticity and what we were talking about here, Mr. Thelonious Monk. Tell me about your exposure to Monk and his tunes and what you love about him.
Obviously, this is specifically just really like his music.
Yeah.
It's just really good. I enjoy it. I enjoy listening to it. I don't really ever get tired of listening to it. I was trying to think of sort of a summation of one artist that has had a meaningful impact on me, and thinking about choices as a musician. And he's one that's there's this sort of funny thing, because there's these specific influences that he has on me. I'm a piano player. He's a piano player. I think that probably the way that I dress on stage, the choice of wearing a suit and tie, it's probably more directly related to him than any other one person. When I see, and even the beard, and for a lot of years I wore hats. Saw a couple photos of him recently, and he's sitting and he's wearing a gray suit with a white shirt and a tie, and his kind of kind of pointy beard, and he has kind of a fez on, or a weird hat. And I was that's just exactly what I was trying to look like. So there's this thing of this specific thing where it's just clearly I really liked him, and was that guy's cool. I want to be like that guy. When I was trying to play jazz, I would try and play like him. But then there's this kind of the conundrum within that is he's one of the easiest musicians stylistically to ape, to kind of copy, because it's a fairly accessible style. Yeah, you just can't do it. It doesn't sound good. No, it doesn't sound good when anybody does it, right? So immediately it's sort of leads you to the conundrum of like, how do you be more like yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And he was incredibly like himself as an artist, as a player, and how do you accept the influence of him, both like his actual output, but then also the influence of like, he was somebody that just didn't think like anybody else around him, didn't play like anybody else around him. How do you sort of aggregate those influences and come out the other side as something new? In a sense, he's kind of like both a literal inspiration to me, but also a sort of a spiritual inspiration. Yeah, how do you resolve those quandaries? Mm-hmm. And another pianist who I really, really greatly admire, very influential on me, but I couldn't play like him in 100 years. Like if I practiced every waking hour, is Brad Meldau.
Oh my gosh!
Who I think he's probably the best.
Yeah.
Alive, living active piano player. But he said somewhere in an interview, there's this, I think of my playing as being like Thelonious Monk's. And then he sort of, he explained it. I mean, he's very brilliant. He explained it, and he was talking about the sort of refraction of melody and theme. And the way that sort of Monk's music has this kind of Baroque quality in that it there's the themes, and then it splinters the theme down. It's like almost like cubism. It's like it shatters the theme into all of its pieces, and then he's picking up the pieces and he's rearranging them and he's improvising. And that's something that I found really interesting, and I think is sort of connects to the thing with the Hockney painting and some of the things that I've talked about, like thinking about like what makes me a musician and what is like my style or what is my thing, because I do so many different things and I work with so many different people and I'm always trying to do something different and I'm always being asked to do something different. So that's something I think about now when I listen to his soloing, is I listen to there's the idea, and then there's like the little sliver of the idea that's reflected back at different angles and in different qualities throughout his music, and it's rhythmic, it's harmonic, it's melodic, and that really fascinating. And that's, I think, probably, other than just he's awesome and he made a lot of great music, that's probably analytically the reason that his style is so endearing and has almost become more and more relevant in the modern age. His solos almost sound like turntablism. It's like he's like scratching the melody of the song in the solo. It's like like it's little pixels of the form, and I find that continually fascinating. And it's like when you're a singer, you have your voice and your voice is your sound. Ben sings one word and it's like it's Ben. Yeah. Tom Waits sings one word and it's Tom Waits. It's nobody else. But play the piano and it's like every piano's different, every room's different, tuning can be different. And Thelonious Monk can play one note and it's like, that's Thelonious Monk.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you do that? How do you become so unique on an instrument? It's something to aspire to. I will be figuring on that my whole life, within that, like, why is he on a list as being somebody that's important to me or influential to me? And it's like, that's the most fundamental thing. How do you become yourself? So much. He did, and it's really remarkable, and I'm really glad that he did.
Beautifully said. I think there's a line that you, as a musician, have to transition between, especially, instrumentalists, losing just being a technician and transitioning to artistry, and I think that's what we talk about with him. And whether it is that, strong attack or percussive nature of the way he plays, he found that because that was him. That's him coming out into his playing, and finding that is one of the hardest struggles. And so, I think he beautifully said your admiration and what he's kind of taught you and continues to pull out of you. Well, Zac, we will get you out of here, but before we go, we always ask 5 rapid questions here at the end of the show. First one here: if you could be on any reality TV show or had to be on a reality TV show, which one would you choose?
Maybe like one where you have to bake a pie or something.
There we go. Well, I don't even, British Bake Off or something, one of those things. Okay, cool. If people have never consumed any of your pop 5, which one would you want them to go experience right now?
I mean, just listen to that Traveling Wilbury's album. It's great. It's 40 minutes long. It's on all the Tidal, Spotify, Apple.
Yeah.
It's great. Just listen to that.
Who's an artist that you'd love to work with that you haven't had the chance to yet?
I would love to work with two of my favorites that are still active making music. Elvis Costello and Tom Waits are both huge fan of both of them. If I ever got to like sit in a studio with either of them, I would be very, very happy. But they're doing all right without me, so I'm not waiting by the phone.
When I say memorable recording session, what's the first one that comes to mind for you?
it's probably one where something went wrong. Having a fever, like 103 fever, and like being like on my back on the floor of the studio, like trying to play, like kind of like reaching up over, like so sick.
Yeah.
Which now, of course, you wouldn't like after COVID, you would never go to the studio sick. But there was one session that I made it to where there was that, and there was another session where I had food poisoning, and I actually couldn't. I loaded up my car and started driving to the studio, and I was so sick I couldn't make it to the studio. I pull over, and had to call them and say, "I'm so sorry. I tried. I was on my way." So that's the most memorable one. It's the one I didn't do, where I had food poisoning and I had to turn around and go back home. But I really tried to get there.
Wow. Wow. Last one here. What habit or quality do you think has contributed most to your success?
Probably versatility.
Nice.
Probably the most enduring quality. Being able to adapt myself to like all kinds of situations has been really valuable. Now it's doing the band a lot and still doing session work a lot. But when I was younger, I mean, I was just all over the map.
Yeah.
Doing all kinds of different music and just ping-ponging between it. I think that being able to absorb something quickly and get inside it, participate in a kind of relatively authentic way, even if it was not like the music I'd been listening to my whole life, but something where you're like, it's supposed to sound like this.
Yeah.
And then you make it sound like that. So I think that's probably the thing.
That's amazing. Well, we'll let you go. Is there anything you want to promote or a place people can follow you or follow your work?
I don't do very well with self-promotion. I don't have a website or there's very little social media and stuff for me on the internet. Sorry.
Do you have any like projects that are coming out soon that we can ask people to go listen to?
I'm not sure when it's going to be out. I just finished scoring a movie that I think is going to be called Paint.
Wow.
With Owen Wilson. That's really funny. It was a real blast to do the music for it. It's a comedy, and I'm imagining that'll be out middle of this year, middle of 2022, meaning this year. So that'll be fun, and then probably pretty soon after that there'll be a new Death Cab album.
Well, heck yeah!
Summer, fall 2022. We're shooting for, but don't. If I don't think it's a secret that we're trying to do that, and if it doesn't happen, it's because sometimes things don't happen on schedule. But that's so hopefully that we're about to start recording it. When this airs, we'll be in the middle of recording it. So.
That's amazing. I'm so excited for that. Well, thank you again, Zac. We really appreciate your time here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks, Zac.
That'll do it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard today, please go out and support Zac on the road. Death Cab for Cutie has touring dates throughout the country, so find your nearest show and check it out. Separately, Zac also asked us to update that the band is cooking up a new album. And while they aren't quite ready to announce anything just yet, you can follow the band on socials at Death Cab for Cutie for any new album announcements. If you liked our podcast, rate and review us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow us on socials at MyPop5. Share your favorite episode with a friend and tag us when you do. We'll see you next time, but until then, what's your Pop 5?